This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. It's Mark Bayer, and you're tuned into When Science Speaks. Thanks so much for joining us. Today's episode is brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists and engineers get funding, gain influence, and build relationships with the stakeholders who matter most. It is such a great pleasure to have Guy Bloom on the show today. Guy is an executive coach, a team effectiveness consultant. He's an author, and he's a podcast host with 3 decades of experience in performance coaching. He's also a winner of the UK's Training Journal magazine's Best Leadership Program. And I also should mention here that Guy is a 4-time martial arts Hall of Famer. He enables leaders, teams, and organizations to lead without the need of positional power, to create leaderful, purposeful outputs that drive culture and value. He engages his clients in what he calls adult conversations, the true commitment to learning and a willingness to make the changes at a personal and commercial level that drive actual change. Whether it's one-on-one coaching, team effectiveness, large-scale mindset shift, Guy brings teams to the table who can take a clear, thorough look at their business, the associated behaviors that are either adding value or sabotaging it. And then he and his team create an intervention that will create the change that is required. Welcome to the show, Guy. It's wonderful to have you here.
Well, after an introduction like that, I'm not quite sure if it's me you're supposed to be speaking to.
No, this all has the benefit of actually being true.
It's fantastic to be here. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. And so there's so much to talk about. And, of course, your book recently came out, and we're going to talk about that as well. It was a lot of fun being on your podcast, too. I should mention that.
It was great to have you
leaders
on.
And to listeners. And we'll have links in the show notes to the book and to the podcast and to the other resources that we talk about right now. But before we get to all of that, I would love for you to share how your growing up years, how you were just first drawn to martial arts before, we get into your current work.
So I was a really kind of skinny little kid when I was quite young. And I don't know if you ever remember, some of you listeners may remember, but Screech from was it Rung by the Bell? Or
Saved by the Bell, right?
Saved by the Bell, that's it. I think I was that. And I say that with an element of humor, but not that much. So I was an easy target, and the whole host of things, and I wasn't the confident gentleman that you now have before you.
Right.
So I was bullied as a kid. Mm-hmm. And, to a point where, I look back on it now and, these trials and tribulations maketh the person. Mm-hmm. But, it was pretty bad at the time. And, I saw a Chuck Norris movie. I saw a Bruce Lee movie, and I thought, this is it. This is the answer. Mm-hmm. And I went to some martial arts classes, and I didn't enjoy this one and that one, and I found what I particularly kind of gravitated towards the instructor, now I know the leader in some respects of that space and place. And I was probably around 12, 13, 14 years old, and that was it. Then I spent the rest of my life, involved in creating, learning. And, I'm careful to use the word mastering on something that you never quite master, but dedicating myself to that.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you were really successful at it too, as a Hall of Famer. I want to then move to how you made that transition from that world to become such a successful and effective leadership and coaching expert.
Well, I came from a pretty mixed bag of a family environment. So my father was married 4 times, my mother 3 times, and I'll finish there. But that gives you a real clear line of sight on the confusion and the chaos that existed in my life. So I didn't go to university. I left school with virtually no qualifications at all. I'm a smart guy in many respects, but I didn't have that formative educational background. I moved into doing various roles. I first started out working in the UK. It was called Tandy, but it's Radio Shack in the US. And I started in those spaces selling electrical goods, moved my way to becoming a store manager in retail, became an area trainer because I was very good at selling. So I became, if you're good at selling, show other people how to do it. And before I kind of knew it, with no plan, whatever, I was in an area role in an organization and I was doing training. So I was an inverted commas trainer and I was doing martial arts alongside it, but I was doing sales and service training. I was 22, 23 years old, something along those lines. And as I kind of kept going into more senior training roles where I became a group talent manager or a head of learning and development for various organizations in the UK, my seniority increased, martial arts alongside of it. And I suddenly realized that all the successes that I was having or enabling other people to have was absolutely through 2 things. Number one was recognizing that most people really either need help in 2 things. The technical competence, I just don't know how to do a thing. And that was what I was recognizing in the martial arts. Oh, this person doesn't have a lack of confidence. They just don't know how to do it. Or they do know how to do it, but actually it's a motivation issue or it's a mindset issue. Same thing in the martial arts. That person's very skilled, very knowledgeable, but they have a barrier to their ability to handle certain situations. So I saw these 2 things tracking. And the more I brought some of the learning and the skills and from the one place I was getting experience in the workplace and where I was learning my martial arts and put those 2 together, I started to have conversations with people that were more senior. And that was because it was predominantly around behavior and it was around mindset. And you can learn a technique or a model quite quickly, but how do you apply it? Do you have the will to apply it? All these kind of things. And so those 2 worlds kind of merged, and not on purpose, not through any great plan that I had. And I suddenly kind of then recognized that really what I wanted to do was have conversations with people in senior roles who then could impact on the lives of others. And that's how I really see that space. I can work with you, and that's great, but actually you may have a span of control that could be global. It could be thousands of people that report into you indirectly. So if I can have an impact on you, then I can have an impact on others. So that drove me to put these 2 experiences, these 2 life experiences together. And that was, in essence, part of the transition.
I love it. I love it. That is really an inspiring, interesting story, Guy. And it really leads into the next question that I want to ask you about, which is the term that you coined, living brave leadership, and really can see now some of the roots of that term. I'd love for you to share what you mean by living brave leadership. Of course, you have a book and a podcast by that name. What are some of the elements of being a living brave leader?
And this is a thing that when I work with leaders and people in management roles, leadership roles, what I noticed quite quickly is that this parallel had come from my own life. And I talk about leader of self. That's the first thing. You are, and this is not, I haven't invented this concept, you are the CEO of you. You're your financial director, your marketing director, your own procurement director, right? We're all these things. Right. So you are, in essence, in charge of yourself. And the life that I led as a youngster, with various things happening in that life, had meant that I'd had to really address how I was behaving, not because I was behaving badly, but maybe I was being submissive. Maybe I was allowing things to happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
And even though if I went into the stories of it, which would be a completely different podcast, what you'd be saying is, yeah, but God, you didn't have power over adults. You didn't have power over those scenarios. But actually, if you don't become a victim, then you have to take control.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't take control of the situation, but you can take control of your reaction to it.
Right.
So this is the old adage of, there's a car crash. The driver gets out and goes, oh, my goodness, I nearly died. And the passenger gets out and goes, I'm alive. It's not what happened to you, right? It's your reaction to it.
Right.
So my way of really finding a vocabulary, which when I was younger, in no way encompassed the language I use now,
mm-hmm.
but in essence was a living brave mindset of having a question and a statement, which is, am I living brave? And what is my version of that? And I think that was a big question for me, because trying to live somebody else's life doesn't work. If I look at somebody else and go, I wish I was like you, well, comparison robs people, I think, of their lives. If I want what you've got,
mm-hmm.
now that might be an incentive, but if I can't get it in a manner that's healthy, it means that maybe I am content and happy, but I just can't acknowledge that because I've got my eye on something else, right? So you've got to find your own truth.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, living brave was, am I living brave? Am I being the person that is in my own view of my own self-definition of what I'm about? And it was also a call to arms, right? Living brave. My ability to go, I am living brave, which led to other content such as putting your big pants on, such as, and there are various cornerstones, which I can explain to you, but around trust and accountability
mm-hmm.
and bravery and connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to talk about those if there's, the space to do that. But that, for me, there were moments in my life where probably the first time the language started to take shape for me was that phrase, putting your big pants on, which means this doesn't mean it's going to work out well, but you're going to have to do something about it to move yourself forward.
Right.
And guess what? Anybody that's living in this world has either got a social context, a personal context, or a work context where actually what you may have to do, and there are many other different answers, but one of them might be, this is about putting your big pants on. How will it work out? Well, it's not a phrase that says it'll work out well, or even the way you want it to, but actually to move forward from what isn't working for you, that's what you might have to do.
Right.
So that, for me, in the martial arts world as well, you look at the person on the other side of the ring and you go, holy schmoly, look at the size of that monster.
Yeah. Right.
And you go, well, listen, you've got the skill. So now you just got to put your big pants on and get in there and start doing it.
Exactly.
So this phrase led to me to thinking, and then as I became older and developed into a training role, I was able to create a way of using a language that facilitated then some of the things I'd done or thought, but didn't maybe back then have the vocabulary for, but it manifested in that way.
Yeah. So fascinating. And I want to specifically ask you about one of these cornerstones or principles that you talk about, where when you're working with organizations, sometimes you talk, figuratively about beating the drum within an organization until the organization resonates. What do you mean by that term?
Well, I think there's, in my parlance, and I'll just mention again, trust, accountability, bravery, and connection. That's worth saying, because you want to be trusted and you want people to trust you want to be trusted by them. You need to be accountable. You want your people to be accountable. We have to have the brave conversations. We have to do the brave actions. And in terms of connection, we have to be willing to contribute outside of our own need. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about eye contact and we're connected. It's, am I prepared to be not selfless, but not selfish, perhaps, these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
So when an organization starts to beat the drum, for me, that is different to, there's a message you want people to have, so just keep repeating it until they hear it. That's just, just keep repeating it and people will go, oh, blimey, okay, I've got the message. That's a different kind of thing. But you're beating a drum on a culture change or expectation or a way of behaving, a value, or something in those lines that says this requires people to live up to, or to calibrate towards, or to fundamentally change their behavior, to behave in a way that this is how this organization is. This is our culture. This is the way of us. Mm-hmm. And to do that, that means people will have to trust the message, and they'll have to trust the people that are delivering it. We will then have to be accountable for role modeling and being the advocates. Mm-hmm. We will have to be brave in our own behavior when maybe as leaders, it's not our habit and our instinct to actually be the change through our own behavior. And we will have to do this even if it doesn't suit us, even if it actually gets in the way of our day job. But if this is what this organization is trying to do, then we need to contribute outside of our own need. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So beating the drum is that not just recognizing that in this context, I need to be trusted and accountable and brave and connected. Oh, but I've got to keep doing this. Boom, boom, every day. Boom, boom, every week. Boom, boom. I have got to send out that message. So I've got the message, the phrase that we're using, the summary of it, or whatever it is. But actually, I've got to bring it to life through being trusted, accountable, brave, and connected. And people have to experience me and my colleagues in that way. Otherwise, what we're actually doing is we're just verbalizing data. We're announcing something. We're not actually beating the drum by our own behavior. So that's what it means.
Yeah, so key. And it's funny, as you were describing that, I was thinking about, pardon me, your martial arts training too, doing this technique or practicing day in and day out. It's not a one time or, a few times a week and then, you stop doing it. Also was reminded of our current situation as we're recording this. We're still in this pandemic. Hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not an oncoming train. I think it's, more vaccines that are getting improved, which hopefully will get us back to beyond this. But, during this whole process, we did see a lot of messaging, about taking particular health measures that leaders were subsequently shown not to be following themselves.
It wasn't the message itself. But when somebody turns up at a hairdresser's, or they go to their own holiday home somewhere, mm-hmm. Or they go out for dinner and it is in an enclosed space, or all the examples that we all have, you go, mm-hmm. Oh, it's not so much that it's not the beating the drum of telling me, it's when I talk about resonating, mm-hmm. you have to resonate with me. I have to believe in the message deliverer as much as I do the message. So important, right? The messenger matters so much. And this framework that we were talking about around living brave, this is something that has to become habitual, as you were describing. That I guess the time to build up this trust, is people say, like, when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, 30 years ago. The second best time is today. I've heard that before, and I love that. You've reminded me of it. That's really true. And I think one of the things I offer is this idea of craft. There's an equation by a gentleman called Reg Revan, which is learning must be equal to or greater than the change that's going on around you. And I like that because it says, listen, you could be absolutely golden today, but the market shifts or expectations move or whatever it is, and all of a sudden you're not at a level of performance that you actually think you might be. So the craft of being consciously competent. So I do like the idea of habit. I agree with that. But the habit doesn't necessarily mean unconscious competence. Mm-hmm. It can, I believe, it's also the habit of being consciously competent. I need to do this on purpose. I need to keep reading or learning or trying it or practicing the methodology. So everybody wants to be unconsciously competent. And I go, well, yeah, but then how do you know when you've dropped away from it?
Right. And I guess I would say too, that if you're not sort of really conscious of that why, then you're doing it, then you're more likely to stop doing it.
Yeah.
You know, you lose sight of that objective or that goal. I want to ask you, Guy, here specifically about scientists. You know, this has been such a challenging time for all of us around the world, and you know, we've been seeing scientists called upon to be leaders in the fight against the virus. You know, they're communicating to the public, interacting with policymakers. Of course, Dr. Anthony Fauci at CDC in the United States is probably the most prominent example, but this is happening all over the country and all over the world. How can scientists who are typically trained to follow the data and to, you know, kind of report out conclusions based on their science, how can they become effective leaders?
I think leadership it's many things, but for me, it's fundamentally behavioral, which is different to what I see management is, or your role is, which is very often on that management space. So I've got a couple of things here. Number one, I think management is positional and it's hierarchical. You know, the more senior you are, the greater the position that you hold. But actually, if you think about what leadership is, and if I say to any group of people, how do you identify a good leader? They'll come out with 20 adjectives, that descriptors that are transparent and honest, and they hold space on their ideas, and they're all behavioral. They're all behavioral. And there is this reality of, what is my duty here? And my duty may go beyond my fear. And there are certain truths that if I care about society, and that doesn't mean that all my light bulbs are the right ones and, you know, and all that. I don't mean that. But if I feel that I have something that others need to understand and know, then I think scientists can see the role of science as not being just an intellectual enterprise, which I know many wouldn't, but actually this is a cornerstone of society surviving, moving forward, and it comes with responsibility. It's like being a police officer or something along those lines. It's well, what happens if I saw a colleague doing something illegal? If I, you know, the repercussions of me telling others could be great. Yeah, but it's your duty. It's your duty. So, and we could spend hours on that topic. But I think for me, it's about the willingness to recognize that I, as an individual, have information that certain people need to understand and hear. Now, as an individual, that just might be feedback to somebody that language they're using in a meeting doesn't serve them, or it upsets people. So if I don't share that with them, they don't know. But at this level, it's actually what I may know, maybe global. It may be having repercussions, you know, throughout literally this country or the rest of the world. So I think this is around, so what is leadership? What is my self-definition? Am I just my job, or am I more than that? Do I care about the space that I inhabit? And do I see it then as being something that requires more than just the task of my job? And I think that could be a cultural, and I don't know that academic or that learning space very well at all, but I wonder what the learning or the thinking could be around the role that could be added to or enhanced by an expectation that is what the role requires. Like, you expect a fireman to run into a burning building, and I expect a scientist, when they understand something that the rest of the world doesn't, it's a mandated expectation. And if anybody tries to interfere with a fireman going into a burning building, society would absolutely not tolerate it. And if somebody tries to harm a scientist that's trying to share a truth, we don't tolerate it. I think it should be, you know, there's lots of things here that in a perfect world, but I do think it's conversations that change cultures.
Yeah. Oh, so vivid the way you're describing it, and really providing some actionable things that people can not just think about, but also start to incorporate in, you know, their everyday. I guess I would say one thing about scientists more generally that could fit very nicely into this leadership paradigm, which is that for many, it's not just a job. it's really a calling, and that kind of transcendence sort of, to me, as I'm listening, really kind of dovetails with what you're describing, as far as, this isn't just, part of my job. This isn't just, this is larger than that. It's more societal. What I do is not just, go into work every day and spend 8 hours and then, leave. It's got to be what broader than that, which I think is an element of what you're talking about when you talk about leadership. And I want to ask you specifically, Guy, on this idea, because it takes a lot of courage to do that. It takes a lot of self-confidence, and I almost feel like some of the strands of your martial arts, aspect of your background, you're really bringing to bear here, because, people, to put on the big boy pants, big girl pants, you need to really be courageous, particularly, with this COVID situation. We saw scientists, targeted. We saw scientists fired from their jobs for speaking up. So it's not easy to do that, to really get up the courage. What are your thoughts about that?
And, there's a big topic here. I think there's a couple of things for me, which is that, knowing the work that you do, which is enabling people to have a voice and a confident voice, and to have the conversations in a manner that people can connect to, and etc.
Mm-hmm.
One thing for me is almost like, rather than learning how to put out fires, let's have it that people understand that let's not start them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is something here about, when we are training people in this space, are they being trained to talk and communicate and hold space and be able to offer, and being trained in their formative years in such a way that, hey, there's a very good chance that you may be put into this situation in your career, so let's give you that training, etc. So I think there's, what can be done at the earliest to enable it to be in the vocabulary and the thought processes of, well, I've been doing this for 10 years, and of course it had to happen at some point, didn't it? Here it is. I knew it was coming, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the truth. And I also am very interested in what bravery is. And having done work in the past with people who are in the emergency services and sometimes in the military, what I've come to reference, and it's the same for me in the martial arts world, is that bravery is a very interesting thing. If I look at things that I have doubt or anxiety or fear around, and I always have to be brave in response to it, that's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that it's not required, but I used to think, well, be brave, be brave. And then having people that, for example, I know in the fire service, this conversation of what bravery is, and what they said to me was, well, it's not that we're brave, Guy, we're incredibly well trained. We're incredibly competent. We train. You are trained like, trained out of your skin before you're allowed to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you start, it's not like, that's it, you now know how to do it. We stay sharp. We are constantly training. And what I ended then, so when does the bravery bit come in? And they go, well, every now and then, of course, you come across something that, well, hey.
Great.
So looking at things like the emergency services and coming into operation to play with people in the fire service in particular, they offer this idea of, what is bravery? And I was having that conversation. You guys run into burning buildings, for heaven's sake. And the answer was, well, yeah, it's not about bravery, Guy. It's about competence. It's about training and seeing it as that. And I thought, yeah, that's really the same thing, isn't it, with the martial arts? Because at first, of course, somebody says, right, you're going to get into the ring for the first time. Now, of course, there's always a nervous energy, but there's a difference between the fear of it and then the familiarity with it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be familiar with a thing and you can be brave enough with a thing. But of course, if you're not competent, it's always a battle. I'm used to it. I'm brave enough. But if I'm not very good at it, that's where I lack the bravery.
Mm-hmm.
So I do believe that the response to fear or doubt or anxiety is the motivation to learn and get good at doing the process the application of craft that would mean you are good at dealing with those things. And then every now and then you'll meet one that's huge, and you will have to be brave. You will have to put your big pants on because you know what to do. You're used to doing it. You've done it before, but this one's a bit scary. The response could be considerable. The repercussions may be very challenging. And that is where you will have to put the proverbial big pants on.
Yeah.
But actually, most of life's fears and anxieties can be dealt with by craft, competence, get good at it.
That really is such an helpful insight, Guy. It seems to me that competence is really the foundation for bravery, the enabler of it, because maybe the distinction between sort of being brave and being reckless, right? Oh yeah, I can beat that guy. I can run and help these people. But having no training, and thinking that somehow you're going to be able to do this would be reckless.
I totally agree. Listen, I've been doing martial arts all my life, but there are professional martial artists who train all day that would literally, pick me up, and just the fight would only take as long as it took them to decide what to do with me, right? Because they're training 24/7. They're training 7 days a week. They are professional athletes. And I may technically even know more than them, perhaps, but I'm not going to win. Now, that's because it doesn't matter if I'm brave enough to do it, right? I might be technically a better boxer than Mike Tyson. I'm clearly not. But if I was, bravery is not my issue.
Yeah, right.
Because actually, look, have you seen the size of him? He's bigger than me. So even if I was a little bit more competent, a little bit braver, recklessness. So of course there's judgment, but that is the craft. Again, that would be the craft going, now is not the time. Or the craft going, okay, you don't want to do this. You are fearful of the response, but it is your duty. That is the way you validate yourself. You see yourself as being somebody that operates. You've always been told this since you were young, that, hey, it is your duty to do this. There are repercussions. Maybe you've got a family, you've got a mortgage, you've got, but how do you want to live your life? Who are you? What are you? So is it the craft of offering the message? Is it the craft of potentially, do I know how I'm going to deal with the repercussions? What are the conversations I need to have back in my personal life to say, if I do this thing, then it may not go the way I want it to.
Right.
Are you with me on this? There's a craft to pretty well everything. And, some of it we prepare for, but we've never had it happen before. So we're going to have to live through that experience. And hopefully they don't happen very often. But I do believe that the majority of doubt and fear can be dealt with by competence. And then there's that element where, well, I've not ridden this horse before, but I do technically know what I'm doing. But now I'm going to have to put my big pants on. I'm going to have to find my bravery and just put one foot in front of the other and move forward.
Right.
Because that's who I am. That's what I am. That's what I am. That is my DNA, and I've made that decision, and I'm going to live by that.
Love it. Just love it. Building on that, and as we wrap up here, Guy, you've given listeners and me so many amazing things to think about. We'll have obviously the link to your book, because you'll be laying it out. You lay it out there as well. What do you think is one thing that listeners could do after our interview to start on this journey of living brave?
I have been getting this phrase most recently, and it's more relevant for if you're in a workspace, and then maybe if you're in a home space, is finding the situation where you would give the perfect answer of what lies within you. Now, what do I mean by that? If you went for a job interview and somebody said to you at a job interview, if you came across something that wasn't moral or wasn't legal, and that person maybe was senior to you, what would you do? How would you be? How would you react? And then you'd give your interview response. And it wouldn't be something like, brush it under the carpet, let it go, and just hope nobody knew I knew anything about it. Oh yeah, well, welcome to the company. That's not going to happen, is it? You give the interview response. And that's because 99% of the time, we have a strong sense of what good looks like. So what's the gap between what I am doing and what I'd say is the version of me that could be expected?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have two boys, one 6 and one 8. So I can have the interview response, but I have another frame, which is, what do I say to my boys? And if they were watching me on a live video stream in my daily life, would they be embarrassed or would they be proud?
Mm.
Because I just think to myself, if the boys were here, what would I do? Which is a personal version of, if this was an interview, what would I say? So the one thing you can do is to start to say to yourself, depending on the context, it may not be your children if you haven't got anybody, but somebody that cares about you, somebody whose opinion you would not want to have tarnished of you, somebody you would, if they thought that of me, I'd be horrified. And ask yourself that question. If I had to behave in a certain way and I wanted that person to see it, or I was in an interview and I was asked that question, what will I say I do? And what's the gap if there is one? If there isn't, well done me. I know what good looks like and I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But if I'd give a response or I'd offer that side of myself to that person in my life, but that's not what I'm doing, then I'm not being that version of myself. So what is the craft? What do I fear? I must fear something, because if I didn't fear it, I'd be doing it. And if I do fear it, the response to fear is competence. Mm-hmm. So what do I need to go and learn to do so I can step into that space and face into becoming that person?
Love it. Just love it. You know, bravery is infused with competence and craft, as you've described, one of our big themes during this discussion. Guy Bloom, I knew this was going to be a thought-provoking, unique type of discussion, that you're bringing this, your personal experience, your professional experience, in all of this, these different contexts to bear on one of the fundamental questions that people want to know about: how to build leadership skills. And I just thank you for doing what you do and taking time out to join us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And I follow you, and I've had you on my podcast as well. And, that was an absolute pleasure. So people should definitely listen to that, just to hear you talk about your perspective and where you operate from, because that's very valuable. But thank you very much for the invitation to come on, Mark. Really appreciated it.
And listeners, thank you so much for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.